Why do we wear ties at all? Every morning, millions of people loop a strip of fabric around their necks without stopping to ask why. Yet the necktie has survived wars, dress code revolutions, and shifting fashion trends to remain a symbol of formality in modern life. The unexpected origin of the necktie. The necktie, a staple of modern formal wear, has a surprisingly military and multinational origin that stretches back to 17th century Europe. Its beginnings are not rooted in fashion at all, but in practicality, identity, and the chaos of war. What eventually became a polished symbol of professionalism first appeared as a rough, functional piece of cloth worn by soldiers on the battlefield. During the 30 Years' War, 1618 to 1648, Croatian mercenaries serving in the French army wore distinctive knotted cloths around their necks. These cloths served several practical purposes. They helped secure the openings of their shirts, offered a bit of warmth, and, perhaps most importantly, helped identify them as part of a recognizable unit. The style was simple, but it stood out compared to the more rigid and uniform military dress of the time. French soldiers and officers quickly took notice of this unusual accessory. The French, known for their sensitivity to fashion and refinement, were particularly intrigued. King Louis XIV, who ruled France for much of the late 17th and early 18th centuries, is often credited with popularizing the neckcloth after adopting it himself. He even formed a regiment called Royal Cravats, named after the Croatian soldiers, cravat being derived from Croat. What began as a foreign military detail was transformed into a fashionable statement in the French royal court. Once introduced to high society, the neckcloth rapidly evolved. It was no longer just a practical piece of fabric, but a marker of elegance and social standing. Wealthy aristocrats began experimenting with finer materials such as lace, silk, and linen, turning the simple military scarf into elaborate and decorative arrangements. The way it was tied became almost an art form, with intricate knots and folds signaling taste, sophistication, and even personality. As the style spread across Europe, it continued to change. By the 18th century, the cravat had become a central feature of men's fashion, especially among the upper classes. Manuals were even written on how to properly tie one, reflecting how seriously it was taken as a matter of appearance and etiquette. Over time, however, these elaborate designs gradually simplified, especially as daily life became more fast-paced and less ceremonially rigid. By the 19th century, the modern necktie began to emerge. Industrialization and the rise of the middle class demanded a more practical, standardized form of dress. The overly complex cravats of the past gave way to simpler, more efficient designs that could be tied quickly and consistently. This evolution eventually led to the long, narrow necktie we recognize today. What makes the necktie's origin so unexpected is how dramatically it shifted roles over time. It began as a utilitarian piece of military gear, transformed into a symbol of aristocratic luxury, and eventually became a global standard of professional attire. Few items of clothing have traveled such a complex path from battlefield necessity to boardroom tradition. From military practicality to fashion statement, the necktie's journey from battlefield utility to fashion accessory is a story of adaptation, social influence, and changing ideas about appearance. What began as a simple functional item worn by soldiers evolved over centuries into one of the most recognizable symbols of formal dress. Its transformation reflects not only shifts in clothing design, but also broader changes in society, class structure, and cultural values. In its earliest form, neckwear served a practical military purpose. During the 17th century, soldiers needed clothing that was durable, functional, and easy to manage in difficult conditions. The cloth tied around the neck helped secure shirts, provided a layer of warmth, and offered a small degree of protection against dirt and weather. Most importantly, it became a visual identifier among troops. In the chaos of war, distinguishing friend from foe was essential, and uniform elements like neckcloths helped create a sense of unity and recognition. The turning point came when these military garments were noticed by European elites. Croatian soldiers serving in France during the 30 Years' War wore distinctive knotted neckcloths that stood out to French observers. Unlike the rigid and heavily armored fashion of European aristocrats, this style appeared relaxed yet distinctive. French society, which often set the tone for European fashion, quickly adapted the idea. What had been practical military gear was reinterpreted as something stylish and refined. As the neckcloth entered aristocratic culture, its meaning began to shift. It was no longer about survival or identification, but about elegance and status. The French court, especially under King Louis XIV, embraced the accessory and elevated it into a fashionable statement. Known for his influence on European style, Louis XIV helped transform the neckcloth into a symbol of sophistication. From this point forward, neckwear became closely tied to wealth and social rank. During the 18th century, the accessory evolved into what became known as the cravat. This version was far more elaborate than its military predecessor. Made from fine materials like silk and lace, cravats were carefully arranged and tied in intricate ways. The process of tying one could be complex and time-consuming, and manuals were even published to teach men the correct methods. In this era, the way a man wore his neckcloth could communicate refinement, education, and even personality. As European society moved toward the 19th century, fashion began to simplify. The Industrial Revolution changed daily life, making elaborate dress less practical for the growing middle class. People needed clothing that was both presentable and efficient. The cravat gradually shortened and became more structured, eventually evolving into the modern necktie. This new version was easier to wear, quicker to tie, and suitable for the fast-paced environments of business and industry. By this stage, the necktie had fully transitioned from a military necessity into a fashion statement. It no longer served a practical function, but instead communicated professionalism, discipline, and respectability. The modern suit-and-tie combination became a standard in workplaces, reinforcing the idea that appearance played a key role in social and professional interactions. Today, the necktie continues to carry this symbolic weight even as dress codes become more relaxed. It stands as a reminder of how clothing can evolve far beyond its original purpose. From a simple piece of military cloth to a refined accessory of style, the necktie's transformation shows how fashion often grows out of function but rarely stays there. The tie as a symbol of status. The necktie is more than a piece of clothing. It has long functioned as a social signal. Across centuries, it has communicated wealth, discipline, professionalism, and belonging. Even though modern dress codes have become more relaxed, the tie still carries a quiet but powerful message. It tells others where someone stands in terms of formality, respectability, and social context. Its history as a status symbol reveals how fashion often reflects deeper structures of society. In the 17th and 18th centuries, neckwear began to gain symbolic importance in European aristocratic culture. What started as a practical military cloth was transformed into the cravat, a decorative accessory worn by the upper classes. In this period, clothing was one of the clearest indicators of social rank. Unlike today, where style choices are widely accessible, fashion in early modern Europe was tightly connected to class. Silk, lace, and finely tailored fabrics were expensive and reserved for those with wealth and influence. The more elaborate the neckwear, the more it suggested that the wearer had time, money, and social standing. The complexity of tying a cravat itself became a marker of status. A carefully arranged knot was not just decorative. It implied that the wearer either had the leisure to spend time perfecting their appearance, or the means to employ someone to do it for them. Manuals on how to tie cravats became popular among the elite, turning neckwear into a kind of skill-based fashion language. Knowing the right style or knot could set someone apart in courtly society, where appearance played a central role in reputation and advancement. As society moved into the 19th century, the Industrial Revolution reshaped the meaning of clothing. With the rise of the middle class and the growth of business culture, dress became more standardized. The modern necktie emerged as a simplified version of the cravat, but its symbolic function remained strong. Instead of signaling aristocratic wealth, it began to represent professionalism, discipline, and reliability. Wearing a tie in business or formal settings became a way of showing respect for structure and hierarchy. In offices, courts, and institutions, The tie became part of a visual uniform that suggested seriousness and authority. It helped distinguish professional environments from casual ones, reinforcing the idea that certain spaces required formality. Even when individuals did not hold high social rank, wearing a tie could signal ambition and aspiration. It became a kind of equalizer. Within professional settings, everyone wore one, but the quality, style, and confidence with which it was worn still communicated subtle differences in status. Over time, the tie also became associated with power. Politicians, executives, and public figures often wore ties as part of a formal image that conveyed control and credibility. In many cultures, appearing without a tie in formal settings could be interpreted as disrespectful or unprepared. This expectation reinforced the tie's role as a marker of institutional respect and authority. In recent decades, however, the tie's status symbolism has become more flexible. Casual dress movements, especially in tech and creative industries, have challenged traditional ideas of professionalism. In some environments, wearing a tie can even signal formality to the point of being out of place. Still, in law, politics, and traditional business sectors, it continues to function as a visual shorthand for professionalism and seriousness. Ultimately, the necktie remains a powerful symbol because it operates at the intersection of tradition and perception. It does not need to be practical to be meaningful. Instead, it communicates messages about identity, role, and respect within a social system. Even as fashion changes, the tie endures as a reminder that clothing is never just clothing. It is also a language of status. Standardization in the modern suit era. The modern necktie, as we know it today, did not simply appear. It was the result of a long process of simplification and standardization that took place alongside major social and industrial changes in the 19th and early 20th centuries. As societies became more urban, business-oriented, and structured, clothing also shifted toward uniformity. The necktie played a central role in this transformation, becoming a standardized accessory that helped define what formal dress looked like in the modern world. During the early 19th century, men's fashion was still relatively elaborate, especially among the upper classes. Cravats and neckcloths were common, often tied in complex and expressive ways. However, as industrialization spread across Europe and North America, daily life changed dramatically. Work became more regimented, cities grew rapidly, and the middle class expanded. In this new environment, practicality and efficiency began to influence clothing choices. People needed attire that was not only presentable, but also easy to wear and reproduce consistently. This shift led to the gradual simplification of neckwear. The elaborate folds and knots of the cravat gave way to more streamlined designs. By the mid-19th century, several styles of neckwear existed, including bow ties, ascots, and early versions of the long necktie. Among these, the long tie gradually gained popularity because of its simplicity and versatility. It could be tied relatively quickly, adjusted easily, and worn with a variety of shirts and jackets. This made it especially suitable for the growing number of men working in offices and administrative roles. The rise of the suit as standardized male attire was closely tied to this development. The suit itself, consisting of a jacket, trousers, and waistcoat, became a uniform of modern professionalism. Within this framework, the necktie served as a small but important finishing element. It added formality without disrupting the overall simplicity of the outfit. Over time, the combination of suit and tie became the default appearance for businessmen, professionals, and public officials. Standardization was also influenced by the growing importance of institutions. Banks, corporations, government offices, and legal systems all required a sense of order and consistency. Dress codes emerged as a way to reinforce this structure, and the necktie became a key part of that visual language. Unlike earlier fashion trends that varied widely across regions and classes, the modern tie helped create a shared standard of appearance across different professions and countries. By the early 20th century, the modern necktie had largely taken its current form, a long strip of fabric, typically made of silk or similar materials, worn under the collar and knotted at the throat. Its design was deliberately simple and repeatable, allowing it to be mass-produced and widely adopted. This standardization reflected broader industrial principles: efficiency, uniformity, and scalability. Just as factories produced identical goods, fashion increasingly embraced consistent styles that could be worn by large numbers of people. At the same time, the tie maintained a subtle flexibility within its standardized form. Different patterns, colors, and knots allowed individuals to express personality while still adhering to formal expectations. This balance between uniformity and individuality helped ensure its long-term survival in professional environments. Even today, the necktie remains closely associated with traditional business culture. Even as dress codes continue to relax, its standardized form is instantly recognizable across the world, symbolizing continuity in professional attire. Though newer styles and casual clothing have challenged its dominance, the tie's role in shaping modern formal dress is undeniable. In the end, the modern suit era transformed the necktie from a varied and expressive accessory into a standardized symbol of professionalism. Its evolution reflects a broader shift in society toward order, efficiency, and shared expectations, values that continue to influence how people dress in formal settings today. The tie in workplace culture. The necktie has long held a unique place in workplace culture, serving as one of the most recognizable symbols of professionalism. Even though its practical purpose is minimal, its presence in offices, courtrooms, and formal institutions has carried strong meaning for over a century. The tie is not just an accessory, it is part of a visual language that communicates respect, structure, and readiness to participate in professional life. As modern workplaces developed in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, dress codes became more important. Industrialization brought large organizations, corporate offices, and bureaucratic systems that required a sense of order and consistency. In this environment, clothing helped reinforce expectations about behavior and hierarchy. The suit and tie became the standard uniform of white-collar work, signaling that the wearer belonged to a professional setting, governed by rules and formality. The tie played a key role in distinguishing professional life from casual life. While the suit provided structure and uniformity, the tie added a finishing detail that marked the outfit as formal. Wearing a tie suggested that a person was prepared for serious interaction, whether in meetings, negotiations, or public-facing roles. It created a sense of discipline and attentiveness, even if only symbolically. In many workplaces, especially in finance, law, and government, the absence of a tie could once be interpreted as a lack of seriousness or respect for the environment. Over time, the necktie also became associated with authority. Managers, executives, and officials often wore ties as part of their daily attire, reinforcing a visual hierarchy within organizations. This did not necessarily mean that a tie made someone more capable, but it did influence perception. People tend to associate formal dress with competence and credibility, and the tie became an easy way to project those qualities. In meetings or public settings, it functioned as a subtle tool of professional presentation. However, the meaning of the tie in workplace culture has not remained static. In the late 20th century, many industries began to relax their dress codes. The rise of technology companies, creative industries, and startups introduced more casual environments where comfort and flexibility were prioritized. In these settings, the tie often disappeared entirely, replaced by open collars, polo shirts, or even t-shirts. This shift reflected changing ideas about productivity and professionalism, where performance mattered more than appearance. Despite this trend toward casual dress, the tie has not disappeared from workplace culture. Instead, its role has become more situational. It is now commonly reserved for important events such as interviews, presentations, client meetings, or formal ceremonies. In these moments, wearing a tie signals respect for tradition and awareness of the occasion's importance. It becomes a deliberate choice rather than a daily requirement. Interestingly, this shift has also given the tie a kind of symbolic flexibility. In some environments, wearing a tie can still signal authority and seriousness, while in others it can appear overly formal or even out of place. This dual meaning reflects the broader evolution of workplace culture, where norms are less rigid and more dependent on context. Ultimately, the necktie's role in workplace culture shows how clothing can carry meaning beyond function. It has served as a marker of professionalism, a sign of respect, and a tool for visual identity within organizations. Even as workplaces continue to evolve and dress codes become more relaxed, the tie remains a lasting symbol of formal work culture and the traditions that shaped it. Rebellion, fashion, and decline. The necktie, once a universal symbol of professionalism and formality, has undergone a striking cultural reversal in recent decades. What was long considered essential office attire has increasingly become optional, and in some environments, it's even outdated. This shift reflects broader changes in fashion, workplace culture, and attitudes toward authority. The story of the tie's decline is not just about clothing, it is about rebellion against tradition and the redefinition of what professional means. For much of the 20th century, the suit and tie dominated workplaces, schools, and formal institutions. Wearing a tie was seen as a basic requirement for respectability, especially in fields like law, finance, politics, and business. However, by the late 20th century, cultural attitudes began to change. People started questioning rigid dress codes that seemed disconnected from actual productivity or comfort. This questioning set the stage for a gradual rebellion against formal attire. One of the most visible signs of this shift was the rise of casual Friday. In corporate environments during the 1990s, initially introduced as a small concession to employee comfort, it allowed workers to dress more casually at the end of the week. Over time, however, this practice expanded, and many workplaces began adopting business casual or fully casual dress codes. The tie, once a daily necessity, became something worn only for special occasions or client-facing meetings. At the same time, cultural changes outside the workplace influenced fashion trends. The rise of technology companies and startup culture in the late 1990s and early 2000s brought a new image of success, one that emphasized innovation, creativity, and informality. Figures like tech entrepreneurs and designers often appeared in open-collar shirts, hoodies, or simple casual wear, challenging the traditional image of the suited professional. In this context, the tie began to symbolize not authority, but formality that some saw as unnecessary or even outdated. Fashion itself also played a role in the tie's decline. Modern style trends increasingly favor comfort, simplicity, and versatility. Minimalist clothing, athleisure wear, and relaxed tailoring have all contributed to a broader move away from restrictive or highly structured garments. The necktie, with its precise knotting and formal associations, began to feel out of step with these evolving preferences. Yet the decline of the tie is not simply a disappearance, it is also a transformation. In some contexts, the absence of a tie has become a form of subtle rebellion against traditional authority structures. Choosing not to wear one can signal independence, creativity, or a more modern approach to professionalism. In this way, the tie has become a cultural symbol whose meaning depends heavily on context. Wearing it can signal tradition and respect, while rejecting it can signal innovation and change. Despite its reduced everyday presence, the tie has not vanished entirely. It still appears in formal events, ceremonies, interviews, and institutions where tradition remains important. In these settings, it retains its original associations with seriousness and respect. However, its role is now more selective than universal. Used strategically rather than automatically, the decline of the necktie ultimately reflects a larger shift in society's relationship with formality. Where once strict dress codes reinforced hierarchy and uniformity, modern culture increasingly values individuality and flexibility. The tie, once mandatory, has become optional, a symbol whose power now lies in its rarity as much as its tradition. In the end, the story of the tie's decline is not about failure, but adaptation. It shows how fashion responds to cultural change, and how even the most established symbols must evolve when society redefines what it means to dress, work, and express identity. The necktie has traveled an unusual path through history, moving from military practicality to aristocratic fashion, from a marker of social status to a standardized part of professional dress. and finally into a more optional, symbolic accessory in modern culture. Few items of clothing have remained so recognizable, while continuously changing meaning. What makes the tie especially interesting is that its purpose has never been purely functional. Even at its most practical origins, it quickly became a symbol first of identity, then of status, and later of professionalism. Over time, it adapted to the needs and values of each era, reflecting broader shifts in society, work, and fashion. Today, the tie no longer holds the same universal authority it once did, but it has not disappeared. Instead, it has become situational, appearing in moments where tradition, formality, or respect are emphasized. Its continued presence in these settings shows that even as dress codes evolve, symbols rarely lose meaning entirely, they simply change how and when they are used. Ultimately, the necktie endures because it is more than fabric. It is a cultural artifact that tells the story of changing ideas about identity, authority, and appearance.